thank you all. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you for your work, your support of the Rachel Corrie Foundation. I'd like to thank the foundation, to thank Craig and Cindy and Sarah, the rest of Rachel's family, and all the other people who have worked so hard. You know, it's an amazing thing that we have. When Craig and Cindy talk about being lucky of what the legacy of Rachel has meant, it's very real, and I think very important for us to recognize that it's not only about celebrating the life of this extraordinary young woman, but it's also about recognizing how a legacy has been created of really working for peace and justice. Not only celebrating her work for peace and justice, but having that work be a springboard for all of our work. And that's an amazing opportunity for all of us. It's a challenge, and it's a great honor. And I'm very grateful to be part of that living legacy of what Rachel's work has left behind for all of us. So all of that goes on right now in the context of election fever. You've all been reading the papers every day, and of course all the headlines are about the US wars around the world, right? Isn't that the headline out here? No? What papers are you reading? You know, it is rather extraordinary. This is a nation at war. We are at war in the most intense way, with escalating civilian casualties rising in too many countries, and threatening a war that is threatening to undermine even the illusion, let alone the reality, of security for Americans as well. And yet, we hear virtually nothing. In the context of the economic crisis, now you all remember, it was just, 10 days ago, they passed a $700 billion bailout bill, right, to bail out Wall Street. And immediately the cries went up, where's the money going to come from? And we started hearing very stern words. Well, you must be prepared. There may have to be difficult cuts. There may have to be cuts in health care, and cuts in education, and cuts in Social Security, cuts in entitlement programs. Excuse me, did anybody say cut the military budget? Because what happened just a week before that $700 billion bailout, there was another vote in Congress for almost $700 billion. This one was about 663 billion, I think, just about 700. That was the military budget for next year, not including the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. That was a separate $182 billion budget that had already been voted on. So you take one step back and say, let's look at this a little bit. We have just committed ourselves to spending $700 billion that's allegedly going to stabilize the market, save our ability to avert a worldwide depression, and we don't know where the money's going to come from. And in the meantime, we're spending billions, hundreds of billions, on these weapon systems that are not only obsolete before they ever get built, but are designed for wars that no longer exist, targeted at enemies who no longer exist, and making everything worse in the wars that are going on. So how do we think about that? What do we do about that? One thing is, we have to look at the election and keep remembering that whatever happens in the election, and it matters a great deal who gets elected, but whoever gets elected, I think all of us are going to have to spend the next 4 years in the streets protesting. Because while there are enormous differences between the candidates, enormous differences in the dangers of a number of issues, not least of them being who gets appointed to the Supreme Court, the realities of where they stand on issues of war and peace and Middle East policy, unfortunately, are not nearly as distinct as their rhetoric would have us believe. what we're seeing, and we're seeing it in this last period of the Bush administration, is a consolidation of the kind of escalating militarism, escalating militarization of foreign policy that has been a hallmark of the Bush administration from virtually the day it took office, even before 9/11. So what does that mean in the immediate period? It means that the expansion of NATO right to the border of Russia, the treatment of Russia in the recent Georgia context, all of that, we're seeing an escalation of the military side of foreign policy and a diminution of any attention that might be paid to real diplomacy. Poland, the new NATO member, all of a sudden has this new supposedly defensive anti-missile shield, which nobody in Poland wants. No one in the Czech Republic wants the one they're about to get, but the governments there are so dependent on the United States' support for membership in the EU, membership in NATO, all these things, that they're willing to say, okay, we'll take your missile shield, which, number one, doesn't work, number two, is aimed at an enemy that doesn't exist, and number three, is opposed by virtually the entire populations of each of those countries. And that's supposed to be the beginning of a new foreign policy that's going to make us all safe. Now, do they think we're stupid or what? It's an extraordinary thing to see. The latest, and I don't know if you've all heard this, is that for the first time, the US is establishing a US military base in Israel, which is new and different because of all the years of massive, uncritical military, diplomatic, economic, and political support for Israeli occupation and Israeli militarism and Israeli policies of apartheid. There has never been a US base on Israeli territory. For the first time, Israel is being given, has been given, because it's now been established just last week. All of this happened while we were all looking at the $700 billion debate. Nothing else made it to the papers. Israel was given, almost identical to the one in Poland, an ostensibly defensive anti-missile shield. It was manufactured by an American company. It's going to be run by 120, well, I call them mercenaries, you can call them what you want, but civilian contract workers for this company who will be sent to Israel to set it up and run it and teach Israelis how to use it and whatever, and 2 US soldiers. Why is that? Why do we need 2 US soldiers? Obviously, if there's 120 mercenaries, they don't really need these particular soldiers. But by having US soldiers, it makes it a US military base. So the message that goes out, just for instance to Iran, just to pick an arbitrary possibility, is that if you strike Israel, it will not only be a strike against Washington's best friend, it will be a strike against the United States of America, and you will pay a price from the United States of America. That's the message that we are hearing.